Hi, DrBiology here. This is a quick video on a paper 2 topic for AQA Combined Science in Biology, and it's related to homeostasis and response. So that is the fact of what homeostasis is. Okay, and as it says there, it maintains optimal conditions, action, and all cell functions. And you know that it's body temperature and your water levels. In this topic, they'll want you to know about the nervous system and then go on to look at blood glucose and also then see how hormones affect your body. For your body to control its internal systems, it needs receptors. So these receptors can be found in things like your eyes, your nose, your skin, okay, and they detect stimuli. They're called stimuli, which are changes in the environment. So, for example, temperature, or there might be a smell, for example. This then is picked up by the coordination centre, which in most cases is the brain, and particularly things like the pituitary gland, and they receive and process this information from those receptors. And then effectors can be one of two things, and your examiners like to ask you this a lot, and effectors are either muscles or glands. So that brings about a response which restores your body to an optimum level. So let's go to receptors. So let's have a look at the receptor section related to specialized cells that detect change in the environment, which is a stimulus or stimuli, and it stimulates electrical impulses in the response. So sense organs. Now in foundation tier, they really like you to know these sense organs, and higher tier, but this is a very popular question in foundation tier. So skin is, the stimulus is touch or temperature or pain. So when you touch something, if it's hot, you'll know it's hot, okay? The tongue is for chemicals, so that picks up, you pick that up in food or drink. The nose, again, chemicals from the air. The eye is, you have receptors that receive light, and ears is sound and position of head. That should also say, I think, balance. So determining whether you're standing up, lying down, or sitting down. So if we look a bit more about the nervous system, so here we have the receptors that we've just been talking about, the sense organs, and then an electrical impulse travels through a sensory neuron to your CNS, which is known as your central nervous system, and then can travel back through motor neurons to your effectors, which are muscles and glands. The electrical impulses are travelling through nerve cells. Nerve cells are called neurons, as you can see in the picture. A neuron, there's a neuron, and they're a bundle of, a nerve is a bundle of neurons, and they are adapted to carry electrical impulses. Okay, it's really important you use that word, electrical impulses. That's the one that will get you the marks. And as it says there, a bundle of neurons is called a nerve. The nervous system, as it says there, it enables you to react to your surroundings and coordinate your behaviour. And as we've already said, information passes from receptors, so stimulus affects a receptor, receptor picks up that, and it travels along a neuron, known as a sensory neuron, to your central nervous system. That consists of two things, your brain and your spinal cord. Again, a popular question in your exam. And it's the CNS that coordinates the response. So it decides what to do and then sends an impulse through the motor neuron to effectors, which means that muscles will contract, so you might move, or glands secrete hormones, which we'll come on to in a bit. Now all of this takes, it doesn't take very much time at all, but if you're in danger or something is happening, or you need to do a kind of a subconscious things such as breathing or blinking, you need a different type of impulse system to work, and that's where reflex actions come in. So reflex action is when it does not involve the conscious part of the brain, okay, and it makes it much, much quicker. It's an automatic response, and this involves a different type of neuron called the relay neurons. Here we have a diagram showing a reflex action, again very popular with the examiner. So again, you've got the stimulus, okay, and then you've got the sensory receptors being picked up, for example, in a finger, for example. Let's say you touch something that's really hot. The electrical impulse passes through the sensory neuron, but you'll notice that it doesn't go up to the brain this time. It goes across a synapse. We'll talk about synapses. That's a gap between two neurons, and then a relay neuron in the spinal cord, and then it travels back via a motor neuron to the muscle in your hand, so that your effector contracts, and therefore you move your hand. Now, as I said, notice it doesn't go through the conscious part of the brain. And it's going around. It's kind of almost it's a much quicker system of getting you to do something, basically, to respond. So remember, there's a stimulus. That's the first thing. Okay, so stimulus, and then a receptor picks up the stimulus, and then it sends it through electrical impulses through a sensory neuron to the relay neuron, then back via the motor neuron to an effector, which is a muscle or gland, and the response, and in this case, removing your hand. If you're going to be doing higher tier combined science, then you will need to know about a synapse. A synapse basically is a gap between two neurons. And if you look at the diagram, you can see firstly the electrical impulse travels along what we call the axon. Okay, so that's through the nerve inside the neuron, sorry. And this triggers the nerve ending of a neuron to release chemical messengers. Now, these are locked up in what we call vesicles, okay, these green things, and the chemical messengers are known as neurotransmitters. And they pass across the gap by diffusion, so they're diffusing across this gap, and they're able to then bind on to receptors on the other side of the synapse on the neuron, and they bind. And what you need is specific what we call neurotransmitters to be released, and this stimulates the second neuron. And then that reinitiates and starts the electrical impulse again. So it's going from an electrical impulse in 1, okay, and then at 2, this triggers the neurons to release the chemicals, called chemical messengers, called neurotransmitters. 3, they diffuse across that gap, and then 4, the receptor molecules on the second neuron, they bind to these specific neurotransmitters, and then it stimulates the second neuron to continue to transmit that electrical impulse. So the nervous system is quite a quick way of responding to changes in your environment. The second type of homeostatic system that we need to know about is what we call the endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system is related to hormones, okay, and they are produced by glands, okay. So we're talking about anything that produces glands, and hormones travel through your blood, through the bloodstream, and they travel to what we call target organs. So, for example, adrenaline is released by the adrenal glands, and its target organ is basically the heart, and it increases the heart rate. So that shows what I mean by the gland, the release of the hormone, and then the target organ and what it does. So that's quite a good way to remember the different types of hormones. For both foundation and higher tier, you will need to be able to label a diagram of where you would find the main glands. One thing that I don't like about this diagram is that it says brain. Well, really we're interested in the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is known as what we call a master gland. The reason being is that it has lots, it does release more than one hormone, and it controls a lot of things that are going on in your body. A couple of others you might not have heard of is thyroid gland, which produces thyroxine, which controls the rate of metabolism, so the rate that that chemical reactions occur in your body. Adrenal glands, you would have heard of adrenaline, fight or flight hormone, and it speeds up your heart rate and increases the levels of sugar in your blood, so to divert resources to your muscles and brain, and that's found on top of your kidneys. The pancreas, you would have heard of the pancreas before when we looked at the digestive system, but in this case it's not about it producing enzymes, it's producing the hormone insulin, which controls your blood sugar level, and we're going to be talking about that in a bit more detail. And then we've got the testes, important for testosterone, for changes in puberty, and it also stimulates sperm production. And then finally the ovaries, and that's related to the menstrual cycle, and they produce estrogen, which causes, again, a change in puberty, but it does control the menstrual cycle. Sometimes in an exam they might ask you to evaluate the differences between the nervous system and endocrine system, and this is a pretty good list that would be worthwhile learning for your exam. So first of all, the nervous system is related to electrical impulses, okay, so electrical, whereas in the endocrine system it's hormones that are moved by the bloodstream, and these are chemicals, which is slightly different. Nervous system may travel faster, usually have an instant effect, whereas the endocrine system is slower, but the endocrine system relate to hormones, they're usually longer lasting, whereas a nervous response is usually short-lived. And the nervous system says that the impulse acts on individual cells, whereas hormones are going to have a larger effect on different organs. It might still work on cells or particular organs, but it's going to have a bigger effect. Okay, so for higher tier, you'll need to understand what we mean by a negative feedback control system. So as it says here, it responds when conditions change from an ideal set point and return conditions to this set point. So for example, let's say in terms of glucose, okay, so let's say you have a meal at this point here. Well, when your blood sugar levels go high, insulin is released, and therefore it will reduce back down to that set point, okay? But it then might go a bit lower as you use up the glucose, maybe you don't eat for a while, and then you're going to release another hormone called glucagon, and then it keeps going like that, but it always needs to come back to that set point. And it's, as it says there, it's a continuous cycle of events, and I'll show you a little flow diagram. So this is a negative feedback loop, okay? So first of all, says that the conditions change is detected, corrective mechanism, so for example, if it's endocrine system or hormone is released, it means that something reduces or increases, and it goes back to the set point, and then that corrective mechanism is switched off and it goes back to normal, and we're at the same point. It's very dangerous for your body if it doesn't have a negative feedback system, because if there is a condition that changes and it gets worse and worse and worse, and it affects your body more and more and more, then it can eventually lead to organ failure and death. One of the key homeostatic responses you're going to need to learn about is about how we control blood glucose levels. Now, glucose, as you hopefully will know from paper 1, is you need glucose for respiration. So your glucose in the blood needs to be maintained at a constant level, and you got insulin, which is a hormone produced by the pancreas, and it regulates blood glucose. If it's too high, the pancreas produces insulin and it causes glucose to move from the blood into the cells. And as it says, in liver and muscle cells, excess glucose can be converted to glycogen for storage. This diagram summarizes what happens. Okay, so if we look at it, the first thing is to note there's too much glucose in the blood. It's the pancreas that produces insulin, okay, and that's released into the bloodstream, and that allows the glucose to be absorbed by body cells and also be stored in the liver. And that will then reduce blood glucose levels. Okay, so that's what you need to know for foundation tier related to blood glucose. But if you're doing higher tier, you need to learn what happens when there is too little sugar in your bloodstream. So when you have too little glucose, you're going to have a second hormone called glucagon. Okay, so glucagon is released by the pancreas, and that converts glycogen that's stored in the liver, and it converts it back into glucose to be released back into the bloodstream. Also, you can get glucose from the breakdown of amino acids or fats as well. So if you haven't got any stored glucose in your liver, it will then come from your cells and it will be released. And you definitely need to know that for higher tier. Now there is a condition that you'll need to learn about, a condition related to where blood glucose levels remain too high, and that's called diabetes. Okay, that's when your pancreas cannot produce enough insulin, or your body cells are not responding to that insulin. And it can be treated in two ways, and it depends on the type of diabetes. But it's treated by injecting insulin. Okay, and it causes the liver to convert glucose into glycogen, which reduces your blood glucose levels. So type 1 diabetes is a disorder in which the pancreas fails to produce enough insulin. Okay, it's characterized by uncontrolled high blood glucose levels, and you usually treat it with insulin injections. It's known as early onset diabetes. Type 2 is when the body cells no longer respond to the insulin produced by the pancreas, and there's two ways you can control that. It's mainly by controlling the amounts of carbohydrate in your diet, and maybe an exercise regime of common treatments to deal with that. You need to know obesity is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. So moving on to hormones related to puberty and also the menstrual cycle. So puberty is a change in life that means that a child's body develops into an adult's body, and you need to know about the fact that it's hormonal changes that occur, and that makes the sexual characteristics develop. So testosterone is produced by the testes, and it is the main hormone that stimulates sperm production. And then in females, estrogen is produced by the ovaries, and at puberty eggs begin to mature, and one is released approximately every 28 days. So this is ovulation, and it's also when the egg is being released is ovulation, and this is known as the menstrual cycle. Okay, so the menstrual cycle, it's a recurring process, takes around 28 days, and it's during which the lining of the uterus is prepared for pregnancy. So if implantation of a fertilized egg occurs, that uterus lining is not shed, basically. So the lining is then shed if there is no fertilization. So this is known as menstruation. This is a common type of graph they might show you. Okay, actually you can't see everything there. I'll just reduce it a bit. There we go. Okay, so you can see how the different hormones change in terms of their concentrations. So the first one, estrogen, you can see menstruation occurs, estrogen's quite low, and then just before just after, menstruation, the lining increases, so does estrogen, and then just before the egg is released, it reduces again, and then it increases again up until menstruation. FSH is called follicle stimulating hormone, and that matures the egg, so that'll be quite high early on, okay, and when the egg's matured, it kind of dips down again. LH is called luteinizing hormone, and that is the main hormone that releases the egg. Now for your exam, probably you only need to know the letters, so FSH, but it's worthwhile knowing what it means, okay? FSH is produced in the pituitary gland, so it does two things. It causes the egg to mature, and it stimulates the ovaries to release estrogen. Now, estrogen is made in the ovaries, and that it stops, or a better word is inhibits. Okay, so inhibits FSH being produced. Okay, so that only one egg matures in that cycle. It also repairs, thickens, and maintains the uterus lining, and it stimulates the pituitary gland to release LH. So LH, made in the pituitary gland, the master gland, and that triggers ovulation. Ovulation is the release of a mature egg. And then the final one, which we'll talk about a bit when we talk about contraception, is progesterone, and that maintains the lining of the uterus during pregnancy. So if there's no pregnancy, then that will decrease, and therefore menstruation will occur. I would definitely learn the hormone, where it's produced, and its role. And also I would look at some exam questions where you have to apply that knowledge, so by looking at a graph and working out what's going on. Part of the exam is going to be talking about contraceptive methods as well, so you need to know about different types of methods related to hormonal and non-hormonal methods. The main one you'll need to know is about the pill, which is the oral contraceptive, and the fact that it contains hormones to inhibit FSH, to stop FSH being produced. Okay, and they contain estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and then there's other methods that you need to know about there. So particularly barrier methods, intrauterine devices, spermicidal agents that disable or kill sperm, abstaining from intercourse, and also surgical methods. Now, my best bit of advice for this is that in the exam they probably will give you some of this information, and they might give you some graphs or data about their effectiveness, and you need to evaluate or describe or explain some of the information in the questions. And the final section is about treating infertility. This is higher tier only, and it's related to how, if you cannot conceive a child through normal means, how you can use other methods. And the method that they want you to know about is IVF, or in vitro fertilization. So in IVF, if a couple's having difficulty, okay, they can give the mother a fertility drug, which in this case contains FSH and LH, and it stimulates the maturation, that means maturing, of several eggs. So the woman will release several eggs. Now those eggs, let's go to the diagram here, okay, those eggs can be collected, and they're collected from the mother, and they are removed, and then they are added, the eggs are added to the father's sperm in a test tube or in a glass petri dish. In vitro is Latin for in glass, so that's related to glass, so that's why it's called in vitro fertilization. The fertilized eggs develop into embryos, and then the scientists, the laboratory technicians, can look at the healthiest embryos, and then when they're a tiny ball of cells, they insert usually more than one embryo, because not all of them will be taken up, and they're placed into the uterus and implanted into the side of the uterus. An obvious benefit of this is that a woman will have a chance to have a baby of her own, okay, but there are some disadvantages. Particularly, it's very emotional and physically stressful because the success rates are not always high. They are improving, but it's still quite emotional time whether you can have a baby or not. The other key thing is that it leads to multiple births. Now, you might think, oh, that's great. If you can't have a baby, let's have a few. But the more multiple births a person has, the higher the risks are to both the baby and the mother. In the exam, they might give you some data or some information showing the number of births from IVF, if there are multiple births, and the effect on that baby. So things like lower baby weight, for example, or higher death rates. There are also ethical implications to think about IVF. So people are concerned about people who might want designer babies. So for example, embryos might only be chosen that have desirable qualities. For example, gender, so whether it's male or female, going to be a male or female. Also, the embryos are not always destroyed, that are not used may be destroyed, sorry. They usually are frozen for a while, so that if a woman wants a second baby they could use that embryo, but many are discarded, and as we know from previous topics that some people consider those embryos to be new lives and view their destruction as unethical. Okay, that's the end of this video. Please do subscribe to DrBiology. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos in the future related to paper 2. I'm also going to be doing some exam technique as well. So I know I've been talking a lot about things like describing, explaining, evaluating, looking at data, and we're going to do all those kinds of things to help you in the preparation of your GCSE. I will see you soon. Bye for now.